have decided this week, because there's so much going on, that I would not have a guest this week. So you're just going to have to put up with me, because there's a lot going on this week, and there's a lot of questions that people have about elections and voting. And thought I'd start with some of that stuff. So today in Missouri and in many other states is the last day to register to vote. Our presidential election is in 27 days, and as you know, it's been a interesting election year, a unusually interesting election year. But then again, you say that, and sometimes you think that this is the most unusual one, but many are interesting and unusual election years. That tends to be the norm rather than the exception. And I thought I'd sit today and talk a little bit about that and about election law. So one of the things I've done over many years is volunteered to be an election poll watcher. And so what that entails is so the question is, and I've had friends ask me, and thought I'd start with some questions about that. What does that mean to be a poll watcher? This comes, in the debate a week ago Tuesday. President Trump said something about he encourages his people to go out and watch everything at the polls. Now, it's totally inappropriate and against the law in every state to go and intimidate people at the polls or to do that. It's called electioneering, and there's specific electioneering laws. You'll see signs when you go to vote about nobody who's part of a campaign or part of an election can go within a certain number of feet of the entrance to a polling place. However, if you have a certification and you're approved by the Missouri Secretary of State and the local election board, you can be in a polling place as an official poll watcher. That's different than a poll worker. A poll worker is employed by the Board of Elections and actually works to take folks, make people to register. Those are the kind folks that do that. A poll watcher is someone who is there to answer questions, to make sure that that people can vote. And so what I typically do when I go and do this is I know the election law. I try to assist people, because the people who are taking the ballots and doing that, sometimes they don't have the time to make the phone calls to find out if the person's at the right polling place, et cetera, et cetera. So whether they can cast a provisional ballot or a regular ballot, because people move around, people move, over 4 years. So they were registered at the last place, and then they moved across the street. They thought they had or they moved a couple blocks away. They thought they had the same polling place. They don't, because although for the presidential election, it doesn't matter where they vote, but for an aldermanic race or maybe a state representative race, that matters, because they crossed into a different district, so they can't vote for that alderman or that person. So what we do is if those people come to the wrong place, you try to get them to the right place, find out where they're supposed to vote. The technology has changed greatly. In the last election I worked, we had all this on an iPad, and I had my computer. I was able to find it, and so I'm trained on this. Every year I go through a training again. I learn the latest in election law, and I go do that. So those are what some of those things are. Let me also answer a question now, and I know we're going to have many questions coming up. I see a ton of questions. Hello, Adam. Hello, everybody. Hello, David. Maya, I have all these great questions. Let me keep on asking them. Let me talk a little bit about what it means to do absentee voting and mail-in voting. So anybody in Missouri and in Illinois can request a mail-in ballot. When you send a mail-in ballot, it has to be notarized. So you can get a mail-in ballot for no reason. You can get it. You could fill it out. You can have it notarized, and you can send it in. If you request a mail-in ballot and you're voting that way, you cannot go vote on November 3rd live at a polling place. If you choose a mail-in ballot, that's your way of exercising your franchise. You can't do it the other way. So that's a rule. Absentee voting is different than mail-in voting. Absentee voting is when you say, I cannot vote live on the date because of a certain reason, so I want to vote absentee. In Missouri, COVID or fear of corona is not proper grounds for absentee balloting. Voting. That was a surprising rule that the Secretary of State did, but he did. You think it would be, but they said it wasn't. So you cannot do absentee because of corona. Now, what absentee means is you're going to be absent to be able to vote on the election day. For instance, I'm going to go vote absentee because I'm going to be absent because I'm going to be working in a different polling place. I'm not working in my same polling place. I don't know I think there's a conflict there. I think there's a rule or regulation or CSR, Code of State Regulation on that. So I'll be working at a different polling place, not that. So that's the distinguishing between mail-in voting and absentee voting, and whether or not you need it to be notarized or not notarized for either of those things. I hope I answered that question. I know various friends and other people have had that question of me. So let me move on with some questions, some additional questions. Who are you voting for? Here, let me go to my chat here because I know I'm seeing questions pouring in. I know they are. I wanted to start with some other questions. Brennan asks, should we change the voting age? Sounds like a can of worms. Voting, great question, Brennan. Who can vote and at what age they can vote has been changed. Women, so when the Constitution was ratified in 1789, the only people who could vote were white males. So then we are more we have that equality more, obviously, with women being allowed to vote, with minorities, African Americans being allowed to vote, getting rid of the legal prohibitions to voting, and then after that, getting rid of the de facto restrictions, Jim Crow laws on voting, which happened. And you think that's over? It's not. So in Florida, they passed a law, an amendment, a constitutional amendment, like it passed like 60 or 65% among voters 2 years ago, where they said felons can vote. We're now going to lift the restriction on felons voting, because although we have a federal system, the states, state by state, controls who can vote, where they can vote, and what the rules are. So let me jump back to mail-in voting. We have all this stuff by our current president talking about he thinks there's going to be fraudulent activity in voting. So just so you know, anytime that's alleged, when they go and look at the evidence, it very, very rarely occurs. I was reading the decision in Montana where the state tried to prevent mail-in voting, and they asked where the government did, the federal government, they said, show me any example of that in the history of Montana voting, and they had none. And in terms of the number of fraudulent votes where that is proven and shown, it's less than 0.01%. It's so minuscule that it wouldn't affect any election. So this idea that there is some ability, so either that it happens, fraudulent voting, or that it happens in any way significantly, is simply false. It's not borne out by the evidence, and it is untrue. It is also untrue that mail-in voting has somehow a fraudulent aspect to it. I see that question on my feed here. 5 states right now only do mail-in voting and have for a long time. All of the members of our military who serve overseas vote by mail. All American citizens who live overseas right now mail-in vote. So, like, for instance, the state of Utah, I listened to the lieutenant governor from the state of Utah, a very Republican state, talking on a radio show this week about that. I've heard other people talk about that. And let's be clear about here's one of the ironies about the criticism of mail-in voting by our current POTUS is, number one, he and his wife are mail-in voting because they're residents of Florida. Number two is traditionally mail-in voting has been a tool of Republicans because for some reason, like it or not, the Republican voter tends to be a more reliable mail-in voter. So what Republicans did in many places like California, Utah, other places, I listened to an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Republican governor of California, his campaign manager, who said that they would bank mail-in voting. It was their way to stay ahead in the election. So the irony of some of the criticism of mail-in voting is that it's been a successful tool of Republicans. So I that challenge to the validity of our process is disturbing because what it does when people say that they don't want to vote, they get discouraged. They think it's not trustworthy, and our franchise, our 240, what are we, 240, 250, almost 250 year tradition of being a strong democracy is challenged. Should we change the voting age? I don't think so. What do you make it lower? No, I think 18 is fine. My son, who turned 18 in June, is voting in his first election. He is away in school. He registered to vote on his 18th birthday. I have the picture. He registered to vote. We requested an absentee ballot because he will be absent on election day. And he was sent that absentee ballot. He's going to fill it in and send it in. That does not have to be notarized. You can vote absentee in person. I vote absentee in person. I go to the Board of Elections, St. Louis County. I go stand in line. I vote. I fill out an affidavit or a statement about why I cannot be present on election day. David asks me, David, can you explain what the Electoral College is and what it's for? Yes, I can. So one of the things I have done every 2 weeks, I think maybe once or twice I've missed in 5 years, is sent out a email newsletter every 2 weeks to friends and family. So if you want to get on my email newsletter, if you want to get my newsletters, please email me, and I would be happy to. Do that. You can go to burgerlaw.com and fill in a contact form, or you can email me at gary@burgerlaw.com. Oh, sorry. Contact our firm. Here, I'll put it up on the screen. info@burgerlaw.com. Call me. I'll put you on my newsletter. So anyway, to get to the point, to answer David's question, I did a long article last night on the Electoral College and did a bunch of research and looked at it historically. And so here's what the Electoral College is. The Electoral College was invented and decided by 11 white men in September of 1787. The Constitutional Convention could not decide on how the president should be elected. So what they did is they gave it to what's called the Committee of 11. And they did that. They had, if you ever want to read a great book, read Decision in Philadelphia about the making of our Constitution. Despite all its flaws, it's an amazing document and created institutions. So we think of the Electoral College as some sacrosanct thing. It was invented and thought up by 11 guys sitting in a hot room in Constitutional Hall in Philadelphia in 1787. And some people didn't want a popular vote because they didn't trust the populace. Some people didn't want to trust it to a legislature because they thought it would be too political. So what they did is they created this thing called electors, and they took it from how popes are elected, the papacy, and these are electors. So they said each state will get electors, the number of representatives in Congress, as well as adding 2 senators. That's the number of electoral votes a state has. Missouri has 10. And you can find out. You just Google it. You'll find out what each state has. Because we have 8 representatives and we have 2 senators in the state of Missouri. Illinois has more. So so you'll have a popular election. We'll all vote on November 3rd, and we'll mail in vote or absentee vote as well. Those votes will be tabulated, and then that will inform the state as to what to do with their electors. Those electors technically vote. So that's what this. That's what electors is. That's what the college, the electoral college is. The word college wasn't used till the mid 1800s. So what the reason why the framers did this is they thought they would have some super smart, altruistic people called electors to go vote. After George Washington became president, then political parties were invented in the United States, and then the idea of the Electoral College went away. And there's statements from like Thomas Hart Benton or other Supreme Court judges where they would say, "There's no point. Why are we doing electors?" If you think that the Electoral College was just challenged for the first time lately as being bogus, because in the Clinton Trump election, we had Trump losing the popular vote by 2 million votes, but winning the Electoral College. In the Bush-Gore election, we had that as well. However, this has happened for a long time. This has happened for a very long time. So in the first time that our president, Andrew Jackson, ran for office, he won the popular vote, but he lost the Electoral College. And that was in 1824. He lost it to John Quincy Adams. And what happened in that election is it went to because there was other people running. There was multiple parties. That even though Jackson won both the popular vote and the Electoral College, when the electors went to vote, he lost those votes from two other candidates, and John Quincy Adams won. The winners of the popular vote lost the electoral vote in 1876 and in 1888, and more recently in the elections, the Bush, Gore, and Trump, Clinton elections. Remember too, our Missourian Harry Truman. He's got the famous picture of him holding up the Chicago Tribune saying Dewey defeats Truman, because they thought he had lost, but no, he won. So what happens, and the reality is today is, so in the electoral, 38 states in the last 5 presidential elections have all voted the same. So what happens is with the Electoral College, that the swinging of electoral votes of only a few states matter. So you always hear this. We hear it now in the news. The only thing that matters is who's going to win Ohio, or what's going to happen in Michigan, or this or that. It gets very discouraging, because we're sitting here in Missouri going, why am I going to go vote if it doesn't matter whether I vote? And that is an unfortunate result of the Electoral College. And if you look, only if it's true, only if swinging the Electoral College, only a few states matter. So we go vote, we elect our electors, and then the electors go vote, and there's going to be 435 plus 100. There's 535 electoral votes, but only a few are going to end up mattering to decide an election many times. Now, then at the end of election day, sometimes you see wide swings, though. So there's a lot of that in the news. Your vote matters. Go vote. I mean, how lucky are we to be able to vote, to have that right to be able to go vote? So that's what the Electoral College is. That's what it is, and that's what it's for. It's to elect our president and vice president. And actually, in 1800, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr ran together as president and vice president. But then Burr turned on Jefferson and got as many electoral votes as Jefferson did. So Aaron Burr, who had the duel and killed Hamilton, and then he left and he went to Louisiana and tried to secede from the Union. That guy was a nutcase. Anyway, he fought Jefferson, and they had tied for electoral college. So if there's a tie this is in the Constitution, if there's a tie in the Electoral College, it goes to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives votes. That happened in 1800. There was 36 votes. 36 times the House of Representatives voted to see who was going to be president. And 35 times there was a tie. On the 36th time, Jefferson won, beat Burr, and became our president. So that's the Electoral College. There's been attempts from 1860 to date to get rid of the Electoral College or modify it. There have been 761 bills passed, submitted in Congress, in federal Congress, through a couple of years ago to change, get rid of, or do something with the Electoral College. There's been all kinds of ideas and stuff to do. There's been luck drawings, literally lotteries. There's been House of Representatives choose. The last major push came in the early '70s when Indiana Senator Evan Bayh's dad, had a big push because of the crazy electoral results, and this was really pushed back by a lot of Republicans. Richard Nixon supported it. You see these videos of this, and I know I'm going into detail here. It's just something I think is fascinating historically. They went and they actually submitted a constitutional amendment. They had 30 states signed on to amend the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. It was passed in the House, and then it got stalled in the Senate with a filibuster. Strom Thurmond and some other people would not support it, and that got killed. So there you go. So now let me keep going to a next question, because I think I'm probably talking too long. I got a lot of questions to answer. Let me move on to some questions, more questions. Let me do this. What are your thoughts? Davey asked me, what are your thoughts on making voting day a national holiday so it's easier for people working to go out and vote? I'm all for it. Absolutely. It should be a national holiday. We should also vote over multiple days. We should also change the Constitution and not make it after the first Tuesday, after the first Monday in November, but make it a Saturday and a Sunday. We should have voting weekend and have it a Saturday and a Sunday where people can go vote so we don't have long election lines. I have worked in the polls and I have had long election lines. I have been sitting there getting people inside and talking with election workers and frankly, U.S. congressmen or other people to say, hey, everybody gets to vote. If you're in line at 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. when the polls close, you get to do it. We've had lawsuits and restraining orders filed in court by other lawyers like me who go in and say, we're going to keep this poll open, we're going to keep that poll open. Remember hearing that. That's not to keep a poll open to do anything nefarious. That's to say, hey, you have such a long line to vote, we need to keep it open so the people who are in line get to vote, which is only fair. You'll look, legislatures close polling places. Legislatures make it hard for people to vote. There's all this stuff going on in Georgia and other states. If you go and you see it all the time, and legislatures intentionally do that. They go and they they make there be less polling places in the minority party so that they can't vote. It's the same thing that they did with the Electoral College. So they've always been all these changes in the Electoral College about whether or not if a president wins a state, does he get all the electoral votes? Or if a president wins the state by 60% and the other person, if one candidate has 60%, another person has 40%, do they get 60% of the votes or 100% of the votes? And there's been a lot of legal changes in that. Massachusetts changed that law. Which way? Is it going to be district by district, or is it going to be winner takes all? Massachusetts changed that every election for like 60 years straight. The party who thought they'd have an advantage of it would change that. So each state does it. Now, 48 states say that if you win the majority in the state, you get all the electoral votes. Nebraska and Maine say no. You get the proportion. But each state can change that. States can go out and do that now. So that's my answer on that question. Do you have any Do you have any crazy voting? I'm going to move around. I think I'm probably boring people on the Electoral College. I could talk about it all day. Do you have any crazy voting stories? What's the strangest poll location you've ever worked? I have crazy voting stories. So I know the law, and I often try to help. So I have had people in polling places complain, and because they see me answering questions, and I've had them complain, and then someone complains, and then the poll workers say, no, he's here helping. And I'm not giving anybody legal advice. And a lot of times, so I'll just say, listen, you can vote here, or whether or not you can cast a provisional ballot. Everybody has a right to cast a provisional ballot. So you can have people say, you can't vote, and that's not true. They can vote. They may have to cast a provisional ballot, and then the question is whether or not that's later. But somebody can vote if they show up at a polling place, even if they're in the wrong polling place. But we try to find the right polling place. I've done things where I've instead of a line being outside in the rain, I brought people inside and tried to snake the line around. I've done that before. The craziest, I think the strangest polling place I worked, and this wasn't as a poll watcher, this was I was helping an alderman. I worked at a polling place that was in someone's garage, a polling place in someone's garage in the city in South St. Louis somewhere. Let me go to the next question. Back in August, President Trump suggested that his camp might deploy police to monitor polling places on Election Day. Are there any laws about this, and what are your thoughts? Yes, there are laws on that. You can't send armies of police to go do that. We already have a very secure system in place where the St. Louis County Police and the St. Louis County Sheriff's Department or the city or whatever county you're in, they are there to work that and to make sure that there is no problems with voting, that no one gets intimidated or threatened. There was a lawsuit in Arizona where from the last election in 2016 where AK-7 armed militia were going to polling places and picking out Hispanic people and asking them for their green cards or ID and trying to intimidate them. There was a lawsuit against that I just read about that either just got settled or something happened to it. So the concern is that if one party, you can't send in the officer people, the Board of Election and the armed police force that is supposed to maintain the integrity of our election can't be Democrat or Republican. It's got to be independent. It's got to be neutral. So it is inappropriate from one party to send armed people there. It's inappropriate for a president to say, I want my followers to go in the polling place and look around and make sure no one's doing anything, because there's going to be all kinds of crazy accusations about stuff. And the professionals who were running the polling stations, like the trained Board of Election employees and stuff, are going to be like, what are you, wackadoodle? What are you saying? There's nothing going on right here. We know what we're doing. The Board of Election is bipartisan, meaning there will be for every Democrat, there's a Republican, and we're mostly a two-party system in here. There are some places, green parties and other stuff, where they're stronger in certain states. So there are representatives on the Board of Election so that we ensure there is a fair process for everybody. This is not a deal where Democrats control anything, much to the contrary of some of the things said by our current president of the United States. It's just not true. These are bipartisan things where people usually get along. My mom served on the city of St. Louis Board of Elections, and if you know anybody of the people that work for the Board of Elections, they try so hard to have accurate, fair elections. They spend 4 years getting it right, and they work so hard in doing it. They're so dedicated. They don't care about who wins or they don't even know who's running when they start. They just want it to be a fair election where everybody gets an unfettered right to cast their vote, to exercise franchise. So Trump can't do that. Trump does not have the ability to federal troops into polling places. We have state people that handle that, and that's how it should be. Here's a question from Maya. Where did the U.S. Electoral College process, the Electoral College, come from? Do you think it is still appropriate for a country of our size in this day and age? I do not. I think the Electoral College is antiquated. I don't think you need to have that extra layer between the popular vote and choosing the president. You don't need that. The idea for it has long been gone. People have been saying for 200 years that the idea for that has been long gone. However, there's that's in the Constitution, and you have to have a resolution passing the House and Senate, and then 3/4 of the states. have to pass a constitutional amendment. It's really hard to do. And the party that thinks it's getting a advantage from keeping the electoral college will try to keep it. And so if you have and right now you have so many, the other reality is, look, I mean, you have low population states having disproportional power in presidential politics because the states, and they're mostly resoundingly Republican. They have 2 senators and 2 or 3 representatives, but they get it's like 38 senators out of the 100 senators are always going to be Republican and are never going to change. And so those are 30 electoral votes that are never within anybody's grasp, which is unfair. Because if you live in one of those states, like I'll let you figure it out, but if you're going to vote Democrat, you're never going to get heard. Now, it's also true that if you live in a highly Democratic state, your Republican vote is not going to go for that. But it's much more disproportionate on the Republican side, which is why Republicans now are grasping onto that. I'm sure in the past there were other parties that grasped onto it, but in modern day, and that was the question. So for a country our size in that, we should not do that. We should do that. We have a post here. If you want voting guidelines, we put up a post in our chat feed about where to go and how to. We have a vote.org, which is a great site about how to vote and the rules for voting there. We also have how to vote and guidelines in Missouri as well. Let me keep on moving so I keep things interesting on our election questions. What are your thoughts on reports that duplicate ballots are being sent out, ballots being thrown in ditches, dumpsters, and trash? Do you feel that standard mail-in voting, not absentee or ballot that you forecast, is the best idea, particularly in an election as controversial and as close as this one? Absolutely, it's appropriate. Absolutely, it's secure. If you look at states that do mail-in voting, they keep track of them. The idea that duplicate votes are sent out is something that is, or that votes are thrown away, is something that is highlighted and blown out of proportion in social media. There were some, I read there were some votes in a dumpster, but the people who had sent those in had not done it the right way in the right envelope. If you look at Utah, they know every vote that goes out. They have a number on each one. When it comes back, those signatures are examined and looked at. So even if there's an error in ballots going out, when they come in, they're reviewed. They don't let people vote twice. The mail-in voting is, in the last 2 elections, in 2012 and 2016, which were highly controversial elections, 25% of the voters voted by mail-in ballot. So this new idea, created recently by the president through tweets, is made out of thin air. I get it. It's not made out of thin air. It is being resurrected and used as a way to challenge the results of a free and fair election, the most free and the most fair election anywhere in the world. It's in America, and it's being used to challenge the foundation of our democracy, and trying to put a postmaster general in and trying to affect and slow down voting and get rid of all this stuff. It's just so inappropriate. But people see that, Brennan. You see these things. You ask this question. People are like, well, what if it's so? It's really dangerous because someone thinks that they're losing in the polls to start challenge the underlying election. That's what banana republics do. We used to think that America is a 250-year-old institution. No one can challenge our democratic norms and the foundations on which we base our elections and our politicians, everybody follows those rules. Those rules aren't being followed now, and those basic democratic institutions are being challenged and said they are false, and they're undercutting the confidence in our democracy. So if you thought that we had an unassailable democracy, look what the last 3.5 years have done to assail the same. What was the name of the book? Ken Muskegon asked me. It's called Decision in Philadelphia. Um, it is. It's a great book. I have a copy of it in my house called Decision in Philadelphia, about how they wrote the Constitution, who came there, who it was. They did some interesting things. They had problems deciding on things. They did this thing called the Committee of the Whole, which was interesting. So the whole body making these constitutional decisions. And then they didn't want to do final votes on everything. So they said, this whole body is now a committee. So to let us ask, to let us resolve these things. And of the political times, they were battling small state versus big state, which led to our Senate versus our House. And they were battling Southern agriculture versus Northern. They were battling slaves versus just white guys. And I say guys because there was no women in that room. They were not in the room where it happened. And there was no women making decisions, no African Americans. They decided on the 3/5 compromise, as you recall, which is it's ironic. It's not ironic. It is part of America that this amazing Constitution, that is a beacon of light of government for the world, had in it the tragic flaw that an African American slave was only 3/5 of a person. That's so American. It's. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying it's because we've struggled with race and these issues all of our existence. We've struggled with the Electoral College. We've struggled with trusting our government. And I can be critical of the president for challenging our democratic norms, but look, Andrew Jackson thought it was bullshit that he lost the election to John Quincy Adams in the 1800s, and it was BS, right? So these things happen. This is the tension that we're still doing. Smart leaders, though, ask us to come together and analyze our differences and accentuate our commonalities in order to get past these and try to deal with them. Why do we still, Davey asks, why do we still use a first past the post system of voting rather than a rank-based voting system? Is there advantage to first past the post? I don't know what that means, Davey. I'm sorry, but I don't know what first past the post. If you mean first past to the Electoral College, or if there's weighted voting. So there is some, states like European countries and stuff that have different weighted voting systems, if that's what you mean. But I don't know if I understand the question. If you could go back, Brennan asked, if you could go back to the 18th century, you could talk to anyone, who would it be and what would you ask them? I don't know. I don't know. It wouldn't be a politician. I don't know. I'm not going to, how many politicians give you honest answers, no matter what, Democrat or Republican or anybody? I mean, I would go back to a historical figure, a historical writer, or I'd go back to a religious figure. I'd go back to, and I'm trying to remember in the 1700s who it would be, but it wouldn't be a politician. It would be an inventor. It would be a religious person. It would be a writer, maybe Walt Whitman, maybe Emerson, and some of their ideas. Now, democracy was a hotbed and very creative and being created then, both in France and the U.S. But I think that would be it. I'm trying to think of religious revolutions during that time, but they were all before that. Muhammad was way before that. But I don't know. Um, Maybe a good Buddhist monk in China or someone to give me wisdom, to add to my wisdom. Um, so Rodney says the history stuff is very interesting. Burger Law asked me, when are you voting for president? I'd vote for you, Burger 2024. I don't know, man. I think I need to um, cut my hair different or something. Uh, at what point does fraud protection become voter intimidation? Kelly asks, at what point does fraud protection become voter intimidation? Is there anything I can do if I think I'm experiencing voter intimidation at the polls? Yes. So at one point, does fraud protection become voter protection? I think ab initio. I think at the beginning. This there is no election that gets decided by 10 votes or 15 or 20 votes. I think you err on the side of everybody getting to vote. We have a constitutional right to vote. You don't have a constitutional right to prevent fraud. And you can when everybody, people talk about sanctity of the elections, that's bullshit. They're trying to prevent voters. I didn't finish my thought. So in Florida, they passed a law saying felons can vote, and then the legislature said, no, you can't if you have a fine. It's the same thing as tests to see if you can vote under Jim Crow laws. It's the same thing if you have trying to whether you're trying to intimidate immigrants or anybody else. Everybody should vote. You should vote. You should say who you are. You should give code numbers or whatever. And then you should make sure no one votes twice. You should make sure everybody's a real person that votes. Dead people shouldn't vote. No one is in favor of voter fraud. But that gets run up the flagpole in a parade of horribles to intimidate and scare people and to keep people away from the polls. It does, and it's successful. So if you think you're being experienced intimidation at the polls, call the police. Tell the poll workers there. The sheriffs will be there in 10 minutes. I've had it happen. I've called them. There are phone numbers. They're posted. There's signs there. Tell the people inside the polls. We'll immediately get sheriffs there. We'll get those people removed. There are people like me that will be there to make sure it doesn't happen. If it does happen, I've made calls and it gets addressed immediately. There's electioneering laws. There's laws about, remember how close you can be to a polling place, all that stuff. David asks me, what are your predictions of the Pence-Harris debate tonight, and will you be tuning in? My prediction is that Mike Pence will be very nervous being on the same stage with a woman that he is not married to. It's going to be scary for him. Other than the moderator, other than the debate moderator. I hope this debate gets moderated because the last one wasn't. Mike Pence asked that the debate be done sitting down, which I don't know why. Maybe he's shorter than Kamala. I don't know. I think, I hope my predictions is there will be less interruptions. There will not be the bullying. I hope there is not the bullying that went on in the last one. That's not what a debate is. I mean, a debate is not like a 5-year-old, hey, I'm going to keep interrupting you and try to intimidate you. I mean, believe me, I'm a lawyer. I deal with lawyers like that all the time. And you know what? I hope it's not, because aggressive bully lawyers try to do that, and I stand up to it and I don't let them. And would you do that in front of a jury? Would you do that in front of a judge if you're arguing as a lawyer? No, the judge will tell you to shut up in a second. So I hope that Mr. Pence does not do that to Ms. Harris. I hope he honors and respects her. I think that would be good. You know, let me tell you something. Kamala Harris made Brett Kavanaugh cry in a Senate confirmation hearing. She is a badass. She is a tough, smart woman, highly respected for her intellect and her abilities and her accomplishments in life. And I hope that she brings it tonight. And I hope it, Mike Pence, honestly, I haven't heard him say that much. He's kind of he's not an aggressive vice president. He's not like a Dick Cheney was to George Bush out there in the front. I mean, he doesn't say much. He's just kind of sitting back there. So he has not taken an aggressive role. I don't mean that in a critical way. I mean, I think anybody would agree with that, although I think it's hard to get a word in edgewise with the current president. So I get it. So I don't know. I mean, I think Mike Pence is a nice guy. He's super religiously conservative. So if you think with the current with the new Supreme Court judge they're trying to put in, and with him as vice president, if you think in 5 years we're going to have Roe v. Wade, you're wrong. John Gogan asked, the Illinois Secretary of State is trying to intimidate me into voting by mail. What can I do? John, you do not have to go. John, you do not have to vote by mail. You can go to the polling place on November 3rd. You do not have to vote by mail. You have the right to go to your polling place and vote in person. No one can make you vote by mail. I don't know what you mean by intimidating. If they're communicating to you about that, there is the reality of voting during the time of COVID. There's the reality of long lines and that kind of stuff. But show up at 7:15 in the morning at your polling place, or maybe they open at 6:15, and go vote live. You don't have to do it. Ken Muskegon, we put up in the comments about the Decision in Philadelphia book. We put it up. Thank you guys for doing that. Oh, Ken said, thanks for the link. Thanks for the link to the book. What is your opinion? Ken asks. Ken is a great guy. Ken was tuned in a while ago. Ken gave riveting testimony in a trial we had 2 years ago. They tried to make me cook the books. Speaking of books, thanks for the link, right, Ken? That's kind of a joke between Ken and I, and anybody else who watched that trial or read the transcript in the Supreme Court or Court of Appeals. What's your opinion on the couple who got indicted for having their firearm out during the protest in St. Louis? And then that's similar to a question I saw above. Sorry, I'm scrolling through my list here. Here's another one. Did you see about the McCloskeys being indicted plus the additional charge of tampering with evidence? I did. I've spoken about the McCloskeys on here because as a lawyer, I don't think it shows. I don't think their conduct reflects well on lawyers. I don't know about the tampering with evidence. I don't know if they took out the firing pin on that gun before they turned it in. So there was something to do with that gun being, and my friend Bob Guller talked about this with me about this. There was something about the fire, whether that was used as a trial exhibit, her gun, and did they take the firing pin out when they handed it into the cops to ostensibly be safe? But if there's not a bullet in it, it's a safe. If anybody knows anything about guns, you don't have a bullet chamber. You just get all the bullets out. You take the clip out. If it was a revolver, you'd have it unloaded. It's safe as having a firing pin out. It can't discharge. I don't know if they did that. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I think it's interesting because they were indicted by the grand jury. If a prosecutor indicts you, the prosecutor can later dismiss the charges. It's a lot harder to dismiss charges if a grand jury has indicted someone. It's a little bit out of the prosecutor's hands. I'm glad that they were that to the grand jury. It seems to me like they were violating the law. I don't know about whether the Castle Doctrine gives them the right to do what they did under those facts. But you know what? Let the jury decide that. They have a good lawyer. They'll put a good prosecutor on it. It's going to be a well-attended trial and a well-followed trial. Now that the McCloskeys have tried to get as much fame as they can out of their pointing guns at black people, because that's how they got famous. They went out and pointed guns and yelled at a bunch of African Americans, and that's their qualification. It's not intellect. It's not smarts. It's not like they're longtime crusaders on these issues. That's what they did, and that's why they're famous. So I don't think we should give them. I don't think that's not something that you should be famous for. That's not something to brag about. So I personally don't think that that's a good thing. But it's 2020. So So it is what it is. What a crazy year it is. Um, all right. First past the post. First past the post is the name for the electoral system used to elect the members. Thank you. That's what you mean. First past the post. Yeah. So yeah, weighted voting. Thank you, Davey. You can only vote for one person. Yeah. So I think so in Parliament in Parliament, um, you're voting for parties, MPs, and then they vote for the prime minister. So it'd be like so here. I don't think weighted voting with our system of government would work because we have the separate offices of president and vice president. The senators in the House aren't don't then elect the leader. But yes, weighted voting they do, and yes, and so I don't think it would work here because of that. Um, but and we also the other thing we do as I'm thinking about it, Davey, and I'm just thinking about it, is so we don't divide our we divide geographically our districts. So we divide, for instance, we divide. So if you're a state representative or a state senator or congressman or a senator, you have a geographic physical area. It's so that won't work. However, if you said, "Hey, across the whole state of Missouri, we're going to have 8 U.S. reps. Everybody can U.S. people in the U.S. House of Representatives. Everybody, or maybe we have seven or eight. I think we have 8. Everybody can vote 8 times, and then everybody could vote everywhere. So you could vote for somebody in Kansas City at anywhere, and then you would have weighted voting that way. Um, it would be. I'll tell you. What would be smart about that, Davey? It'd be a way to get rid of gerrymandering. Because when these and that's hey, vote no on Proposition 3. That's what one of the other things on the problems the incumbents do, and whether you're I'm going to change my background the uh, to the trees. Um, the way that uh, uh, entrenched politicians or power incumbents keep their power is they draw their legislative districts so that they don't get real challengers. So having weighted voting like that would get rid of that and not be a geographical thing. Malik, how are you, Malik? Good to see you, my friend. I hope you're well. Uh, can Donald Trump refuse to leave the office if he loses the election? He's getting ready to. That's what he's talking about. That's literally what he's saying. He's saying, I'm going to keep this. I don't care. It's going to be the first time. You know what George Washington did that was so amazing? When when he when he after his 2 terms, he left. He didn't keep power. It was a crazy thing to do in the late 1700s when he did it. It was unusual. It was surprising, but he did it, which is great. And that's part of the tradition we have. And I think we may have one of the first presidents ever who doesn't do it. He's going to fight it. He's trying to put a new justice in the Supreme Court to do so. You get ready for a big battle. He can't if he refuses. We should send in federal troops and throw him out. If he wins, he should stay. But that is a worry, and that is being trumped up. How about that, Malik? Was that clever or what? Um, Ken, we got a couple of videos. Ken Muskegon, we got a couple of videos up too. Um, you have a constitutional right to vote. You don't have a constitutional right to fraud protection. Yes, that was Rodney. That's my question. Yeah, exactly. And look, um, no one should do fraud. And look, let me. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I sue people for fraud. I sue companies or individuals if they fraudulently steal something. We have the Consumer Fraud Act. I sue people for fraud. I am not a proponent of fraud, but to say that's the case is crazy. Hey Nelson, how are you? Good to see you on my feed here. How you doing, my brother? If anybody wants a great piece of art, I have a bunch of them in my house. Nelson's one of the best artists around. Um, and he's now in Florida. We miss you, Nelson. All right, Kelly asked me, what is a faithless elector? I got 2 minutes. So if a if a if if Missouri has, I think I read on 538, a 95% chance of going for our current president in this election. So, or the 90%, whatever. So let's say Missouri goes for Mr. Trump. Let's say an elector goes to the Electoral College. What if he votes for Biden instead of Trump? Or what if a Biden person goes and votes for Trump at the Electoral College? Does an elector who is bound by state law to vote for a candidate who won the majority, can they switch their vote? Good question. Here's the answer. What happens is they take oaths to the party, to the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, to vote that candidate. Can they break that oath? No. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case that said that parties can make electors vote the way they are told to vote. Now, but what happens if they don't? That's called a faithless elector. It's happened 162 times in the history of our country. 60, 70 of those, I don't have the exact numbers. I can tell you how many times we've had faithless electors. Now, sometimes they can. So there are some states where they don't require an elector to heed that. So that wouldn't be a violation. So let me tell you, faithless electors. They don't vote for the presidential or vice presidential candidate for whom they have pledged to vote. It's happened 165 times as of 2016, 63 of which occurred in 1872 when Horace Greeley died after Election Day, but before the Electoral College convened. That's crazy. Nearly all of the faithful electors have not gone from one major party to another. Nearly all of them have voted for third-party candidates or non-candidates, like to go vote for Ross Perot or vote for a Green Party or a Libertarian Party, as opposed to switching their votes to a major opposing candidate. So that's the deal. Now, and I have a map that I put in my newsletter this morning of states that bind their candidates and do not bind their candidates. So if you're not bound, you're not faithless. So there you go. So that wouldn't be an issue. Replying to John's, thank you, John Gowan. I'm sorry, I don't pronounce your name well. That's a great point. If you look in our feed, we said, hey, go look in the state of the law at vote.org about your rights to vote in the state of Illinois, and they can't do that. Brennan, I love Brennan. Brennan is always asking about the bees. Brennan, I should have had a prop of my bee honey. Brennan, I'm going to have to give you honey. Brennan, I am promising you honey. So I bottled my honey. My honey is tasting really good this year. 2020 was a shitty year for everybody. It was a good year for bees. Bees had a great year. How many bees are there in a colony? Does that number represent their level of success? The second answer to the question is yes, most of the time. The answer to the first question is anywhere from, I'd say, 3 to 40,000. So 34,000. So in the summer, when it's the high time for bees, there's a ton of bees, 30,000, 20, 30, 40,000. But right now, the bees are going down. So I took all my honey supers off. I have all my bees just in 2 boxes. And then I want it to get cold because I want the queen to stop making babies, stop making larvae and brood, because I want them to go down to a smaller colony for winter. So the bees in the summer and winter, they go down to a very small number. They eat the honey, and I'm doing this because they all get in a small ball, and they all vibrate to stay warm when it's really, really cold. So that's what they do. They go down to manageable numbers in the winter, and then after it becomes the spring, they get more nectar, and they get more pollen, and then they start increasing their numbers. And when it gets warm, and then they bloom, and they go back to 30, 40, 50,000. Excuse me, 10, 20, 30,000 bees. So they go down in the winter, and then they eat the honey. But I left them I took a bunch of honey, but I left the bees honey so they can eat all winter. And I will also do supplemental feeding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it get cold. I'm going to let the queens change their behavior. and then I'm going to start doing supplemental feeding of them. I do use sugar water, Brennan. I have these feeders where I have about half sugar, half water, or a third sugar, 2/3 water. I put some honey. I put some chemical little supplements in them, like vitamins and stuff, so they can fight varroa mites and be healthy. And then I supplement feed them, and they take that and they put them in their honeycomb, or they put them in their built out comb, so they have plenty of food for the winter. Then in January, I actually put candy boards on the top and feed them additional sugar for energy over the winter. There's your long answer for that. Here's another last question. Sorry. Do you give free honey to your marketing team? No, I don't. You got to earn it. Maybe I'll give it to David. David's earned it. Actually, you all have. I'm just joking. Davey is amazing. Brennan's amazing. David, everybody else, you guys are great. So there you go. I guess I got to, otherwise you'd turn me off. All right, folks, I've gone over an hour. Thanks everybody for listening on today, October 7th. Everybody register to vote today if you haven't. Everybody get out and exercise your franchise. Don't be dissuaded anyway. Let's keep on going, America, and vote. Thanks everybody. I'll see you next week. Bye.